evening. My name is Richard Weingarten. I'm going to be your host on mental health, wellness, and recovery. I'm a person with a lived experience of mental illness and recovery, and I have the pleasure of welcoming my guest tonight, Dr. Dan Fisher, who is from Massachusetts and who is the director of the National Empowerment Center. I want to tell a story before I let Dr. Fisher have the floor. When I was getting started in mental health back in the late 80s in Cleveland, I heard stories about Dr. Fisher. I heard that he was a young scientist at NIMH who developed mental issues and had to be hospitalized several times. He must have been mistreated in the hospital because when he got out, he vowed that he'd become a mental health, a doctor, a psychiatrist, and change the system from within. And in my own way, I've tried to change the system within also, following Dr. Fisher's footsteps. I'd like to read a brief bio of Dr. Fisher so you can learn a little bit more about him. He received a PhD in biochemistry to discover the so-called chemical basis of mental health conditions. While carrying out neurochemical research at NIMH, Dan was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He recovered, and to humanize the mental health system, became a psychiatrist and has worked for 35 years as a community psychiatrist. He's the co-founder and CEO of the National Empowerment Center. He's a member of the New Freedom Commission on Mental Health, president of the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery, and a professor at the University of Massachusetts Department of Psychiatry. He is one of the developers and trainers of emotional CPR. He just finished a book about his journey, which he calls his Recovery for Life, and that of the movement he's spearheading called Heartbeats of Hope, which is also the name of Dan's new book, Heartbeats of Hope. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Dan Fisher from Cambridge, Massachusetts, who's going to tell us a little about his story and some of the things that he's working on presently. Dan, would you tell us a little bit about your recovery, how that came to be, and what were some of the difficulties in that journey of yours?
I'd be glad to, Richard. Thank you very much for having me here, by the way. I was diagnosed, as you had mentioned there, in my 20s. I was about 25, and I had a belief initially that the psychological problems, mental health problems, were primarily chemical in nature. So that's why I got the PhD in biochemistry. And I was working, as you mentioned, at the National Institute of Mental Health as a neurochemist, studying dopamine and serotonin. And it was the late 60s. I was also in my own therapy, and the world was sort of changing.
It was tilting. I'm a member of that generation, too.
It was changing. And a lot of new movements were occurring, a lot about civil rights, and there was questioning of the war in Vietnam. And so that was my education, my continuing education. And the more I got involved in sort of the world changing, and the more I was in my own therapy, the less I felt that we could answer these questions primarily through biochemistry. Mm-hmm. Because I felt and feel very deeply, more and more, that the difficulties that are described as mental illness are really problems of the heart. They're problems, and I had a broken heart, as my wife had left. I'd been married for 2 years, and I was absolutely brokenhearted. And that's all I could think about was how will I restore and repair this broken heart? And I mean, medication just wasn't the answer for me. And so I went, though, I guess really from despair into another reality. And I was helped a little bit by substances that were not prescribed.
Which will remain unnamed.
Yeah, they were ones that you can and I did inhale. And I was just trying to change the reality I was in. It was so uncomfortable. And I think a lot of times people use drugs and alcohol to escape from the world that you're experiencing. But it's only temporary. And then when I came back, it was like even worse. So I then managed, I don't know, somehow to go into other realities and imagine all kinds of imaginings. I became paranoid, and then ultimately felt there was no reason to talk. So I needed help. But, and I wish there had been an alternative to a psychiatric hospital, because hospitalization is quite harsh. We're still trying to develop alternatives to psychiatric hospitals.
I know, maybe you'll speak about that later too.
Yeah, I'd like to, but there are very few now, and there were none then. So my family didn't know what to do, and I was with my sister and my brother-in-law, he's a doctor, and they took me to Johns Hopkins Hospital, and gave me strong medication. I came back, boom, to this reality, but I hadn't really dealt with the problems of doing work that I didn't believe in, of having a broken heart, of these sort of life issues. But I had therapy. I had a very good therapist. Found a very good therapist, and he
What made him a good therapist? Because you had some other.
I had a not so good one before. Yeah, I had an analyst before who was overly traditional. What I really liked about my second therapist, George, who just passed away recently, actually. George was very human, very much present. I went to interview him and interviewed some therapists.
You mean he wasn't a doctor analyzing you and telling you what you could and couldn't do?
No. He did have psychiatric training, but he was a human being first and foremost. And when I went to see him the first time, I said, I just want you to be real. And he said, I'll try, which was a wonderful response. He was humble. He always believed that I had the answers. I'd say, George, that was so smart what you said. And he'd say, it came from you. And he'd always take it back to me. And he
did he share any of his personal life with you?
He did share some, yeah. He had shared that his family had been refugees in Europe during and after World War II. And later, much later, like just a few years ago, I went and interviewed him and asked him more about, what were you thinking? I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he didn't insist that I remain on medication forever. I said, this medicine is so heavy. I want to come off. So gradually helped me go off the psychiatric medication. And he said, I believed in you. I believed in you. And he was very encouraging. Like, second time I was hospitalized, I came out, and as you mentioned, I decided I want to become a psychiatrist. Some people could have said, I should have had my head examined then.
Right. Too difficult for you, right?
It was a very difficult road. That meant I had to go back to medical school. Then I had to go through 3 years of psychiatric training, psychiatric residency, telling me things that I didn't really believe were the best necessarily. And but when I told him, I was fresh out of the hospital, and I'd just gotten diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I walk in and I say to George, I'm going to become a psychiatrist, and I'm going to change the system. I'm going to humanize the system.
And most psychiatrists say, I think you're aiming a little too high.
Right. And George, he said, I'll be there at your graduation.
Wow.
And he was. He was just terrific. Yeah, I miss him. I'm really sorry that he's no longer alive. But I did, as I say, have a chance to interview him for this book that I just finished, Heartbeats of Hope. I did, I guess I don't have a copy to show to people, but
maybe one of the crew can get a copy and bring it over to us. Did you have one in the green room?
Yeah, in my backpack, somewhere in my backpack.
Okay. You know, Dan, I read your book, Heartbeats to
What did you think about it?
I thought it was wonderful. It was such an intimate kind of reflection or historical thinking about yourself and why you became ill and how you became well again, and your mission now to help other people in difficult circumstances work their way through it. One of the things that impressed me about your book was, and this is something that I also experienced, was that I didn't have my own voice. I graduated college, but I still wasn't in touch with my inner self, and so the voice that I had was like an other person's voice.
Like what you thought you should be saying.
Exactly, what I thought I should be saying, exactly. And
you
it
were
was,
probably good in school.
I was fine, you know, because
Yeah.
I was the
You were repeating what they were telling you.
every time, you know.
Richard, you're such a good student.
Thank you, sir. I just repeated what you just told me. Don't have a good memory. But a therapist in Boston helped me find my voice. And
How,
it was
how
like,
did the therapist do that?
well, he helped me relate from my deeper self. And once I found that deeper self and the voice, I knew I had changed. And it gave me confidence too, because that was who I was. You know, that's who I was.
I can see it in your eyes when you said it. Yeah.
Well, it's true.
Sparkled when you said that.
Yeah,
your inner
no,
voice.
it was amazing. And you know what? With that same inner voice, I sort of captured it from my writing too. And once I started writing with that voice, I started getting published, which gave me a lot of confidence that I was on the right track.
Yes. Well, that is definitely was my experience too. In fact, I've developed a course, Finding Our Voice, and one critical part in it is to go from anger that we all feel often at some point about our life circumstance or treatment that we receive, to transform that anger to passion. Very important part of my advocacy and my being able to present to legislators and to the public, that the public should know that we have a voice and we want very much to get these new ideas across. And they come right from our personal experience. People say, what's the evidence? We are the evidence.
Right.
We're the evidence that people are covering.
We're also the experts on ourselves.
Yeah, experts by experience, they say in Europe. But yes, we're the experts. And actually, I see here that someone's found my book.
Hey, what about that?
And I realize this is not an advertisement. This is just really a sharing. But
But if they want to purchase a copy, where can they go?
where can they go? Thank you. I thought you'd never ask. They go to the National Empowerment Center website, which is power2u.org, power2u.org, which I guess you could put up.
That's also 1-800 number, 1-800-POWER2U.
Power to you also.
Gets connected to your office there at National Empowerment Center, correct?
Yep, you can call, and there is, during business hours, there's somebody there, can answer your questions, you can order the book. And actually on the back of the book, I have sort of a recipe for the system and society.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's,
I was going to ask you about that, you know.
what might help for society.
Exactly.
Well, here's a few of my suggestions. I hope for a day, every person who experiences extreme emotional states is engaged in respectful, hopeful, humanistic, empowering relationships that enable them to heal and recover full, meaningful lives in the community. And that's not just the mental health system, it means every relationship. And secondly, instead of being seen as threats to society, we'll be seen as a source of wisdom that we have obtained through our recovery.
You know, in other cultures, people with mental difficulties become shamans. They become the healers of that society.
That's right, because we've been through our own life experience and we have a lot to share. And we're not any more dangerous, in fact, in many ways less dangerous.
I think so too.
Than people that are not labeled mentally ill, and yet we get blamed for so much violence. Occasionally someone
don't you think that's a lot about sensationalizing the news in order to sell more newspapers and magazines?
Yeah, it does happen. And I know there was a terrible tragedy here, right in Connecticut.
There was.
At Sandy
Hook Elementary School.
Elementary school. And it was a very distressed and, unhappy young man.
Tragedy. It was terrible.
Terrible tragedy. So I don't minimize that at all. But I think that we can reach people who are unhappy and isolated and through emotional CPR, which I want to say a word about.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit now?
Yeah.
Emotional CPR. CPR, of course, is a treatment for the heart to get the heart moving again.
Physical heart. Right.
Yeah, physical
so
heart.
CPR is to restart someone's physical heart, and it's been life-saving for many people. So several years ago, I thought, it'd be good if there were the equivalent for people's emotional heart. Because emotionally, when you're very sad or you're very you're depressed, you're upset, you're disappointed, angry, you've gone through trauma, your emotional heart often is suppressed. So you have difficulty expressing. I went through that. I had trauma when I was younger, and I think that played a big role in my later being diagnosed with schizophrenia. I was trying to escape from the pain, I think, of the trauma. But I think if people can be reached closer to the time that these problems happen, and sometimes just by family members, by friends, as well as by mental health professionals, that there be a good prevention. So we use the C, P, and R as a sort of mnemonic. And so the first thing you need to do when you're with somebody is connect. And a lot of it's nonverbal. You know, we're looking at each other.
Interesting.
You know, and we see each other, see each other's eyes.
See each other's gestures, expression on their face.
Expression. Cultures, and you've been to Brazil, you must see this very much. In other societies, Italy, more southern societies, there's much more in the way of gesturing.
Much more.
More facial expression, more intonation.
Yes.
Body
position is important too.
Yeah, and I think we need to learn that more, especially in these northern climates. And by doing so, I think there'll be less in the way of severe psychiatric problems. Interesting, they did a study comparing Ireland to Italy. And Italy, the manifestation was not as severe of psychiatric problems. It tended to be somatization, you know, oh, I've got a bad arm, I've got a bad, you know, stomach, liver, but not so much of hearing voices. But in Ireland, there's much more of the hearing voices. And one of the real big differences is emotional expression. And I think if you don't express emotionally that self that you were talking about earlier, you just don't get to express it.
Yeah.
So we try to empower, the P is empower, is by drawing out people's capacity to express themselves. And when you connect and you feel your capacity to express yourself, you feel revitalized, more life.
Right.
Like I saw in your eyes.
But do you have to be a psychiatrist to practice emotional CPR?
No, in fact, it's harder for
layperson.
Much better.
Really?
Yeah, because it's natural. You know, we didn't evolve to the, what if we needed mental health professionals all along during our evolution? We'd never be here.
Agreed.
What's the matter with Richard? He seems to be off by himself. Oh, I think he might be having a clinical depression. Well, maybe he's a little sad. Let's just talk to him.
Let's give him some medication, put him in the hospital, see how that works.
We've designed one over here. I know it's all made of sticks, but and I don't know. We just, instead of isolating people, people need to be reintegrated into the community. You know, if you're sad or you've experienced a loss, you might separate yourself.
Which leads me to another question. You've said that in your book that the mental health system should have interpersonal supports, you know, rather than the reliance only on medication or therapy. But what are these interpersonal supports, and how can they be, you know, implemented in a mental health system?
Well, first of all, you said a lot about, there was a lot in that question. Our system right now overly depends, I think, on medication. Now, I'm not anti-medication, but instead of medication being emphasized this much with a font of 40 and interpersonal supports as we're, you know, engaged in conversation, maybe down here at a 10 font level, I like to see it even out a lot more. And quite honestly, I think medication is, in the long run, more secondary. That primary is how you can connect on the human level. And so, yeah, I think we need to teach people or unlearn for people the barriers that exist in human interaction. And because I think deep down everybody wants to connect. In developing countries,
I think we're basically dialogical entities.
Yes.
That we exist, we live with another person, with communication with others.
Yes. That I think is a source of our life.
I think so.
We don't have dialogue. It's emotional dialogue, especially, that I'm keen on, and so if we can engage more people. Like if somebody is very upset, call in the whole family. Talk to everyone, not in a blaming way. It's not the parents' fault. It's not the individual, all their fault. And then open dialogue is an approach that I think is very helpful that way.
Interesting. Doesn't that come from Finland and Norway?
Yeah, yeah, northern
I've
Finland.
heard a lot about it.
Northern Norway,
It's
yeah.
kind of catching on in this country now.
Yeah, yeah. Massachusetts, we've actually had a fair number of trainings. They've come to, there's a woman named Mary Olson who does trainings in Western Mass. I took 2 years of training myself, and they come from, yeah, northern Finland, and their approach is very much dialogue. And they also, though, feel the system as a whole has to change to support the clinicians and therapists going out to people's homes. You need new training. You need new understanding of the problem that's being between people instead of just in somebody's head.
Let me ask you something. Do the parents say and the family members have to be trained to do open dialogue?
No, but they can be trained to do emotional CPR, and I see the two as very complementary. So open dialogue is for the group, the parents and the person of distress, or the person of focus, and two facilitators. But you don't necessarily train the parents in open dialogue. That's more what the clinicians do. But I practice open dialogue, and then I have workbook on emotional CPR, which you can find through our website also. And that, and then I teach the parents. And I'll give you a quick example of how useful it is for parents. So I have 2 daughters, and my younger daughter is an artist, and their community of artists are always sort of a little bit different. They're dealing with different worlds. So a friend of hers went off to Thailand and sent a text and said, "I'm in Thailand and I'm about to get rid of my phone, and this is the last contact I'm going to have with civilization.
No.
You know, goodbye."
Somebody's feeling pretty bad.
Oh yeah, crisis in Thailand. And so my daughter quickly contacted me, and she said, what can I do? And I said, well, it'd be great if her parents could go there, and they do have the means to go there, but they need to know how to talk with their daughter who's in another reality. So my daughter sort of faxed the whole workbook on emotional CPR to the parents. Then I did a sort of a phone coaching. Just be with her. Don't try to judge her. Don't try to do anything to her. Just be there with her in a non-judgmental way. Experience what she's experiencing. Help her feel confident. I went through all these sort of, you know, there are about several intentions, emotional CPR.
And were they receptive?
And they were very receptive and very grateful. They said, oh, we didn't know what we would do. We didn't know what to say.
That's so true of people that say the chronically normal people don't know how to relate to people when they're having emotional distress.
Yeah. And it's just be there with them. And don't judge them. Just be there. And they went there. They went to Thailand. They were able to be with her. They got some assistance for her there. And then she agreed to fly back with them. And then I met them and did a sort of an open dialogue. My daughter and I did some open dialogue with them.
Wow. Right
there in their home in Manhattan. And they, and then she's doing a lot better now.
Isn't that great? What a great story.
It was. I felt very, very heartwarming about
You must have been really satisfied too that an intervention that you designed was so effective.
Yeah, it's very helpful, and people do tell me that, because originally it was designed for helping people just mainly through crises, but people say, and I notice it myself just the more I do it, that just helpful in communication. Overall.
What do you tell people that have a member of their family who has emotional distress? What do you tell? How do they act in the face of stigma or rejection or, you know, some kind of exclusion because of their illness or because of their situation?
Well, yeah, and sometimes the word stigma is used, which actually I'm part of a movement of self-help movement. You are too, and we don't generally like the word stigma because it's like that's the only form, the only group of people that are given that name.
Right.
It's prejudice, it's discrimination. Well, I verify the reality that happens, so that you know, people should be aware that revealing too much about yourself to the wrong person still can be risky. I mean, I'm at a point in my life it's okay to share. You probably feel that way too.
I am. You know, because I've gone through these difficult emotional experiences, I'm able to express myself with people in trouble or people with major illness or major tragedy in their lives that other people can't relate.
That's
because I've been through it myself,
Yeah.
and I feel I have the words, I have the right emotional state of mind when I talk to people like that. You know, you probably felt the same way.
Oh yeah, and I'm not afraid to open up the subject. And it's interesting. My older daughter, when she was in college, she would share with her friends that my father, she said, recovered from schizophrenia. I'd say, "Whoa, what did they say to that?"
Yeah.
They thought it was cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's a
Dan,
topic.
it's been very cool talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for appearing on my show. I'm sure our viewers are going to get a lot out of this conversation we just had.
Enjoyed it.
And I hope that we're able to continue working together in the future in these kinds of activities.
I hope so too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.